What is a country? Well, it's complicated to say the least. We have different classifications on what a political entity is, and some are broader than others. If you looked up a list of countries, you'd get different results. The typical list that people are looking for are sovereign countries, meaning a country that is the top legal authority for itself. England, for example, may be a country, but it is a country within the sovereign country of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. A lot of these distinctions are for legal purposes. England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have their own laws, flags, and capitals, but ultimately on the world stage are collectively represented as the United Kingdom. They have a single monarchy and an overarching government. But there is another category of countries that actually exists in between both of these categories, and that would be the associated states. These are places that are referred to as countries, act as sovereign countries, but there's an agreement with another nation that outsources some of their functions as a state. Or to simply put it, they are sovereign countries, but they get help from others to do their job. The countries that are legally considered associated states are the Cook Islands, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Niue, and Palau. The first thing you might notice is that these are all Pacific Island nations, and rather tiny ones. Originally, these were all colonies that wanted independence. During the Cold War, as most of the world decolonized, it was clear that the traditional European style of imperialism, of simply conquering a ton of land to control it, just wasn't feasible anymore. The United States, upon becoming a superpower, did have some colonies, but ultimately realized that they could project their power without conquering a quarter of the world like the British did. There was economic power, where having good relationships with the United States would result in economic benefits for that country, making them more likely to be an ally. Alternatively, maybe all the United States wants is just a military base, so the country will agree to it in exchange for some concessions of some kind. In theory, the US and the other country get what they want. Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and other powers during the Cold War also adopted this strategy in various ways. And even now, you see nations like China engaging in this sort of strategic diplomacy. In the case of the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Palau, they were all collectively a colony originally under Spain, and then Germany. After World War I, it was made a mandate by the League of Nations and given to Japan. A mandate was this idea that the territory in question would maybe be independent someday, but they apparently needed help getting ready, so they would be put under the control of another country until then. So, as you can imagine, these mandates were basically just ran as colonies. After Japan was defeated in World War II, the new United Nations took the mandate system and replaced it with a trust territory system. This time it was no, really, get these countries prepared for independence. With the exception of South Africa refusing this and deciding to keep Namibia for themselves, the nations holding the trust territories did go along with this. Japan's former mandate was turned into the Trust Territory of the Pacific and given to the United States. During the Cold War, the United States had the strategy of containment to prevent the spread of communism, and these islands made for great military bases. The US territory of Guam was not a part of this trust territory, but it was right next to it, so it also helped ensure a good supply line to it as well. By the early 1960s, every trust territory had become an independent nation except for the trust territory of the Pacific. Likely it was because the United States considered these islands too strategic to let go. But in 1979, these islands were granted home rule, allowing them to make their own local laws. Then in 1986, as the Cold War was winding down, the United States agreed to give the Marshall Islands and Micronesia independence as sovereign nations, but in free association. Basically, the United States agreed that they could be fully independent and sovereign. They could join the United Nations. They can make their own deals with other countries. They can still make their own laws, but these tiny islands do not have many resources, so the United States will be allowed to keep using military bases in their country in exchange for the United States adopting the responsibilities of militarily protecting them and giving them access to US agencies such as the postal system, as well as economic aid. This was a win-win for both these new nations and the United States. Meanwhile, the last bit of the Trust Territory of the Pacific would become independent as Palau under a free association deal in 1994. While there were still leftover concerns from colonial days such as the environmental impact of nuclear tests in the Pacific by the United States, in 2023, all three of them agreed to renew this association agreement for at least another 20 years. Niue and the Cook Islands, however, have a different story. Both were originally British colonies, but when New Zealand became a dominion in 1907, they were also given administration over Niue and the Cook Islands. In 1949, after operating as an independent country for decades, New Zealand achieved full legal sovereignty from the British Empire. New Zealand actually had a mandate/trust territory in the form of German Samoa, which New Zealand granted full independence as Western Samoa in 1962. With this, the status of New Zealand's other overseas territories came into discussion. In 1965, the Cook Islands were granted self-government, while Niue would be granted self-government in 1974. While they were not called associated states at the time, they did run themselves as sovereign nations and participated in several international organizations as themselves. New Zealand would be in charge of their foreign affairs and handle their defense upon their request. But the one tricky area that made them different was that they never joined the United Nations. One aspect of their relationship with New Zealand is that they are allowed to join the United Nations, but if they do, they can no longer be automatically granted New Zealand citizenship, at least under their current relationship. And this must have been considered beneficial enough for those residents of those places because they still have not joined the United Nations. But in 1988, New Zealand made the decision that any future participation in UN international agreements would no longer apply to the Cook Islands and Niue. The UN eventually decided that because of this, as well as the emergence of Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Palau, that Niue and Cook Islands should be legally recognized as associated states. This recognition was given to the Cook Islands in 1992 and Niue in 1994. New Zealand itself established diplomatic relations with the two states in 1993, which is definitely a recognition of those two states not just being autonomous, but countries in their own right. Since then, both have been treated as sovereign states by multiple other countries, and in 2023, the United States officially recognized them both as sovereign states and established relations with them. Some other countries have similar deals where they outsource their defense to another, or perhaps have dual citizenship deals, but most of these deals were made from before World War II, and they weren't as intricate as the deals the Associated States made. Plus, there was no ambiguity over its status on the world stage. So, when it comes to associated states, are they countries? Basically, yes. There's just a few asterisks. I'm Emperor Tigerstar, and I'll see you guys next time.